All right, chapter 4 is carbon and the molecular diversity of life. Anything that's alive or once was alive has carbon in it. Carbon, if you study just carbon as far as chemistry, it's organic. And again, organic is the chemistry of anything that has carbon in it, and anything that has carbon in it was once alive. Okay, so carbon's considered the backbone of life. All living organisms consist of mostly carbon-based compounds. Besides water, we're made out of proteins and fats and sugars and things like that. Those are all carbon-based. They're basically carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Okay, so carbon, because it has four, remember we talked about valence electrons, the one in the outside? It has four and it needs eight. And because of that, it forms a lot of bonds. And so it can form many compounds. They say 90 to 95% of all compounds are organic. They have carbon. So because carbon has that four, it's amazing all the compounds it'll form. Okay. Our proteins. Proteins are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and a little bit of nitrogen. DNA, the backbone, the blueprint to build us, has a lot of carbon in it. Carbohydrates, that makes sense, right? Carbohydrates are carbon and hydrogen, right? And all these other molecules that make us who we are, all living things, they're made out of carbon. So here's one of the simplest compounds. We got carbon in the middle, and then we have different molecules attached to it. Maybe we got a hydrogen and a chlorine, a fluorine, and a bromine or something like that. But because carbon has to form four bonds, it makes a lot of different compounds. It makes a lot of variety, okay? So again, I said this before, organic chemistry is the study of carbon compounds. And if you study organic chemistry, it's not super easy, you guys, I got to tell you. But you're studying between 90 to 95% of all compounds, okay? They range from very simple to huge ones. I mean, you've got methane, which is one carbon and four hydrogen. And you've got DNA, which is, millions of cells put together. I mean, not cells, but millions of molecules put together. So carbon compounds can be very simple. They can be very complex, okay? And most of them have hydrogen. Hydrogen fills in where they need a bond. They're looking for one more, they'll just throw hydrogen in there. So we call them hydrocarbons, and those are the basis of all living things, okay? And again, the reason why we talked about is electron configuration. Carbon needs four. Remember, 8 is the magic number. Carbon has four, it needs four more. So because of that, it forms lots and lots and lots of compounds, okay? Its electron configuration says, hey, I need to form four bonds. And it can form two double bonds. It can form a single bond and a triple bond, but it has to form four bonds, okay? So with the four valence electrons, that's why you get all these varieties, all right? You can throw four hydrogen on there if you have one carbon. You can throw one carbon and two oxygen. Or you can throw one carbon and one oxygen. So you can have carbon monoxide, you can have carbon dioxide. And again, it's just either a double bond or a triple bond, okay? So that's why you can have very large complex molecules, because of all these places to add stuff. You've got four different places. It's not like a halogen that only has one spot available. Carbon has four, so it can make a lot of stuff, okay? And you can take a bunch of carbons and put them together. You can have one carbon and put everything around it. You can have two, you can have 2,000. Carbon will bond to itself as well, and then all the openings have to be filled in with either hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, or something else. But that tetrahedral shape, those four, mean that they form a lot of bonds, okay? And again, I was saying they can form a double bond. You can put two carbons together and they can share four electrons, but that's a double bond, okay? And you'd still have some hydrogen in there, but you'd have less. Or you can have two carbons and they can form a triple bond. They can share 6 electrons. Then you'd have even less spots to throw things in. So it just depends on what, if they have, how many electrons they're sharing. Okay, here's methane, which is a simple one. And here's ethane, where you've got two bonded together. Here's ethylene, which is a double bond. You can see the difference between these two. Okay, So electron configuration of carbon gives its covalent compatibility. That's why it's so easy to form compounds with carbon, is because of that ability to add 4 things to it, okay? The valence electrons. And the most common thing to add to carbon is hydrogen. Oxygen would be next, okay? Oxygen likes to form with carbon, but usually it'll form a double bond. And nitrogen's in there too. Those things, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, those are the things that make up most of living things. That's what you would call the architecture, okay, of the living molecules. But carbon, number 1, hydrogen, and then oxygen and nitrogen, okay? And again, if you look at the valence electrons, the ones on the very outside, it's easy for, for hydrogen to fill in here, or your oxygen, your nitrogen. They're smaller molecules, so they're easier to attach. And again, what are they looking for? They're looking for 8, except for hydrogen. Hydrogen's only looking for 2. Okay, so that because of this diversity, this variation, carbon can do all kinds of things. It can form chains, long chains of, many carbons. You can do a carbon chain of 2. You can do a carbon chain of 2 million. That's the way it is, okay? So organic compounds are carbon chains, but they also can form rings, okay? So carbon is very, very, very versatile. But again, the length and the shape of a carbon chain, it depends on the situation and where and how it's formed. Here's some more. Again, here's propane, what a lot of us use to heat our houses. Okay, 3 chain. We have butene. Now we're starting to get into some rings over here. Cyclohexane, cyclo meaning a ring. And here we have benzene, which is a very common compound. If you take organic, you'll talk about benzene. But these are just some of the small ones. You can add a bunch of these together and make much larger chains. Carbon is very, very, very versatile. Okay. And again, I was talking about before, when they need to fill in a bond or two, then we're going to talk about hydrogen. Hydrogen is really good at just popping right in there. Okay. And so most organic compounds are carbon and hydrogen. They're called hydrocarbons, like fats. Fats are just carbon, hydrogen, long chains, but they just have hydrocarbon components. In other words, just hydrogen and carbon, but they change their shapes and stuff, okay? Hydrocarbons, the thing about hydrocarbons is they're easy to undergo reactions, okay? A hydrocarbon like glucose. Glucose is a sugar that we need for all of our energy. So when you burn hydrocarbons, you get a lot of energy. I mean, our gas that we put in our cars is a hydrocarbon. Okay, we burn it, our cars move, and we release energy. Okay, when we heat our houses with propane, we have hydrocarbons. We burn it, and we release energy, heat. Okay, so there's some groups, molecular groups that add on to organic compounds that are kind of key in living things. So if you have a carbon chain, you can knock off a hydrogen and add what they call a substitute group. Okay. It depends on, the substance. Like enzymes are proteins that we use to digest our food and other things, and they can knock off a hydrogen and add a group so that they have can serve their function. And there's all kinds of functional groups. We're not going to go through them because this is biology. If you want to learn about them, take organic chemistry. Okay. But some of them, here's one called estradiol, and then there's testosterone. These are steroids. Okay. They have a carbon skeleton, and then they have rings fused to them. Okay. So estradiol, that's a female hormone, and testosterone, I'm sure you guys have heard of them. They're both steroids that are very important for the reproductive development of living things. Okay. The sex hormones, they only different. Well, I think I have a picture of them. I'll show you. But really, I mean, you got a male one and a female one, and they do totally different jobs. But I don't have a picture of them. I'm sorry. If you look at them, they're only one ring difference. There's only one simple small part of them that's different. And yet look at the different things they do. Okay. So when you're talking about functional groups and adding stuff on the carbon compound, it doesn't have to be, totally different. You can just change one little thing and you have a totally different substance with totally different functions. Okay, so the functional groups are the groups that you add on to. And really what they do in an organic compound is they're usually involved in some sort of chemical reaction. The number and the arrangements just depends on the molecule and what its job is. Okay, it'll give it unique properties by adding what they call a functional group. And a functional group could be 2 oxygen and a carbon, or a nitrogen, or a phosphate group. It just depends on the functional, what you're looking at. But again, this is more organic chemistry, and I don't want to get too far into that because you're like, this is biology. Stop the chemistry talk. So, we'll keep it simple. All right. Okay, one of the most important organic phosphates, and again, this would be a functional group, is called ATP. And this is what our cells take in, our mitochondria takes in glucose, simple sugar, and it modifies it. And when it's all done, it gives us ATP. And ATP is actual source of energy. So like when you want to move, your muscle cells need ATP. When you want to digest your food, your digestive enzymes or your digestive system, in order to do its job, needs ATP. Okay, so ATP is our energy source. It's our fuel. And that's what our mitochondria does. Okay, and an ATP, it's called adrenaline triphosphate. Okay, it has 3 phosphate groups on it. And really what happens is when we want energy, we break off one of those phosphate groups because there's a lot of energy holding it there. So if we break that off, we get to use that energy. Okay, and then it's not ATP anymore, it's ADP. Okay, so ATP stores this energy, and it'll react with water, and it'll break off that phosphate group and give us energy in the cell. So without ATP, we can't do anything. Okay, and again, ATP comes from glucose, which is a carbon compound, goes into the mitochondria of our cell. And if you haven't heard that before, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell. It produces your energy. And it takes glucose, breaks it down, and makes ATP for us. Then we take this ATP and our blood moves it around to wherever it needs to go, into our cells, into our muscle cells, into our liver cells, our kidney, whatever it needs, gives it that ATP, and it reacts, it takes the ATP, puts it in water, it reacts, and it breaks off that one of those bonds and gives us that energy. Okay, here's what it looks like. This is basically what we're going to do is break one of those bonds, and we're going to use that energy. Okay, and again, here you can see it goes from ATP to ADP. We just take one of those bonds and we get the energy, and we need that energy. Okay, so that's how we get energy. And again, it's an organic compound. Okay, so the versatility of carbon makes it possible for all these different organic molecules, and all living things have all kinds of different organic molecules. They're basically carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, but in different forms. Okay, so we have all these different molecular levels, and that's why we have such diversity in life, is because of these carbon compounds. Crazy, I know it is, but rearrange them and you got different substances with different functions. Okay, so that's chapter 4. We're done with that chapter, so we can move on, and then we'll do chapter 5, and we'll be done actually with our first unit. Okay, again, if you guys have any questions or whatever, just let me know.